Can you imagine a single medical system, a single way of thinking about the body that stayed on top for 1,500 years? Not a century, 1,500. Today, we're going to dive into the incredible story of Galenic medicine, a system that literally defined health and sickness for the entire Western world, all built by one man who is both a genius and spectacularly wrong.
So, you gotta put yourself in their shoes, right? For any doctor in the ancient world, the human body was basically a black box. You couldn't see inside. So how in the world do you explain what's going on in there? How do you figure out why people get sick? And more importantly, how do you even begin to make them better? Well, they came up with an answer, an elegant, powerful theory that would completely take over.
And that brings us to Section 1. The whole system was built on this idea of humorism. You can think of it as their grand unified theory of medicine. It was their attempt to bring a logical order to the complete chaos of human biology. At its heart, the idea is actually pretty straightforward. Your body is governed by 4 essential fluids, or humors. If those 4 fluids are in perfect balance, hey, you're healthy. But if that balance gets thrown out of whack, too much of one, not enough of another, well, that's sickness. Simple as that. But here's where it gets really fascinating. This wasn't just about what was inside your body, it was a whole worldview. Everything was connected. So, take blood, for example. It was considered hot and moist. It was linked to the element of air, the season of spring, and it even explained your personality. If you had a lot of blood, you were sanguine, active, and sociable. It was like the entire universe, the macrocosm, was reflected inside you, the microcosm. So, okay, if you believe all that, how do you actually treat someone? Well, the logic is actually pretty clear. You use the principle of opposites. Let's say you have a cold, right? Too much phlegm, which is a cold and moist humor. The cure? You got to introduce hot and dry things, like certain foods or herbs to counteract it. Too much blood? Well, that's where something like bloodletting comes in. The goal was always to get things back in balance. Now, a system like this is great, but for it to last for 1,500 years, it needs more than just a good idea. It needs a champion. It needs an intellectual superstar to write it all down, defend it, and make it feel absolutely untouchable. And that champion was a man named Galen. And I mean, this guy's resume was just unreal. He was born into a rich family in a city that was a major center for learning. He traveled, he studied, and then he landed 2 of the absolute best medical gigs in the entire Roman Empire. First, he was the head doctor for the gladiators, and then he became the personal physician to the emperor himself, Marcus Aurelius. For Galen, the gladiator arena was the perfect, if gruesome, laboratory. See, there was a huge social and legal taboo against dissecting human bodies. So how do you study anatomy? Well, for Galen, the horrific wounds of the gladiators were, in his own words, windows into the body. He got to see living muscles, bones, and organs in a way that no one else could. And get this, he wasn't just observing. He was good. Really good. He actually bragged about his success rate, and this quote shows you why. When you're getting results like that, people listen. His practical experience gave him an authority that was basically impossible to argue with. But here's what really set him apart. His true genius was putting all the pieces together. He took the medical ideas of Hippocrates, blended them with the logic of Aristotle and the philosophy of Plato, and built this one massive, logically airtight system. He basically said you can't be a good doctor if you're not also a philosopher. And the guy wrote so much. Think about this. His surviving work makes up 10% of all the Greek literature we have from that period. It's just staggering. So, Galen created this intellectual masterpiece. It was so convincing, so comprehensive that it became absolute dogma for centuries. But the whole incredible structure was built on top of one single, massive, unavoidable flaw. And here it is, the fatal flaw. Remember how he couldn't dissect humans? Well, that meant that all of his brilliant work on anatomy, all his detailed observations, they were all based on animals, mostly apes, pigs, and sheep. He had to make this gigantic assumption that their insides were pretty much the same as ours. And for 1,500 years, the medical world just took his word for it. And this led to some pretty colossal mistakes that were taught as fact for ages. I mean, look at this. He described a human liver with 5 lobes because he was looking at a pig, a jawbone made of 2 separate bones because he was looking at a dog. And maybe the most famous one, this thing called the rete mirabile, a wonderful net of blood vessels, which is there in an ox, but spoiler alert, it's not in humans. And this is the craziest part. His authority was so total that if a doctor in the Renaissance dissected a human body and it didn't match Galen's book, they would literally assume the body was a freak of nature, not that the book was wrong. So how does a reign like that end? How do you topple an intellectual giant who ruled medicine for longer than the Roman Empire even existed? Well, and here's the beautiful irony of the whole story. The people who finally proved Galen wrong did it by taking his own core message to heart. Galen had always preached that direct observation was the most important thing. So eventually, a new generation of scientists came along and said, you know what, he's right. Let's actually go and look for ourselves. And the revolution basically happened as a 1-2 punch. First up, in 1543, you get Andreas Vesalius. He's the guy who finally starts systematically dissecting human bodies. And he publishes this incredible book that is essentially the first accurate map of human anatomy. Then, a bit later in 1628, William Harvey comes along. If Vesalius fixed the map, Harvey fixed the engine. He's the one who proved through experiments that blood doesn't just get used up, it circulates in a closed loop pumped by the heart. And this just shows you what a complete game changer that was. Every single one of Galen's fundamental ideas about blood, that the liver makes it, that your body just consumes it, all of it just thrown right out the window. Harvey's work completely rewrote the rules. But here's the thing about Galen. It's really easy to just say, he was wrong. And sure, on the details he was. But he was fundamentally right about the most important thing of all. His real legacy wasn't his flawed anatomy map, it was his insistence that medicine had to be based on reason and direct observation. In a way, he built the intellectual foundation for the very science that would eventually replace him. Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. For over 1,500 years, the humoral theory wasn't some crazy idea. It was just accepted fact. It made perfect logical sense to everyone. So it really makes you wonder, what are the things we believe are absolute medical fact today that in a few hundred years people will look back on and think, what were they thinking?